Welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We're moving now into our first segment on this lovely Wednesday morning. And this one surrounds general election history and trends. Now, in to tell us about it, or to talk to us about it, is none other than Carolyn Trench Sandiford, who is a political analyst. And we always love listening to her every time an election is called. She's here with us. Carolyn, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Marlene. It's always a pleasure to be with you all and open your eyes. Sometimes I wear so many hats.
Definitely.
As I always say to people, I am constantly learning.
Yeah.
Carolyn,
You know, Marlene, in my life, I always say to people, every time I finish to learn a little course or something, I go on another one.
Yeah.
And it keeps me relevant, but it keeps me aware of all the varying dimensions
That's right.
of our world and how we live and the different factors that impact
Yeah.
and affect, you know, our development, particularly, of course, in Belize. Belize and to the bone, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so when I come on the show, oftentimes people say, well, I hear you discussing that. I said, yes, if I would be a planner or I'm a politics or something, but it's always a pleasure, Marlene.
Well, and I think that's what I love about your conversations we have with you. I know that you are at your core driven by data. And in whatever field we're
Yes.
talking about, that's the most important thing that we can look at. We start with the facts, and that's what the data should outline. You know, and I love your suggestion of
Exactly.
doing courses, because it just reminds us that there's always something new to learn as well. But let's get into it.
That
'cause
is
there's
right, and now even more so.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. We got to start off by talking about
Yes.
today, of course, nomination day. What is typically a very pivotal moment in the election season is going to be drastically different. And so I think that that's where I wanted to start before we dive into what the trends have been and what we know so far. Just talk about what it's like for you, someone who
Absolutely.
avidly pays attention to all things elections.
Yeah.
What is it like this election season? Because I don't know about you, but it feels so strange. You could never
It
tell me
does.
that there's an election happening next month.
It's what I call the nuances of 2020 and the fact that 2020 is just a year of unpredictability and uncertainty. And so everything is different, but it's also a learning experience for us because we do live in a different time. Even when we look at data, Marlene and John, there was a time you could be looking at trends, you know, within decades and so on and so forth. Now it is changing so fast that something happens today, in a week or two, it changes.
Yeah.
And I think COVID-19 has brought that experience to us because the more you learn, the more you find out, the more you can use data to strengthen your positions or change your positions or change your interventions.
Yeah.
And I think this is what life was and what we were discussing a little bit earlier, that life is not static, it's dynamic. And so even with the election season, we are in a democracy. We are at a point in time when I believe it's very important for the country to start looking at, it's like you're at that crossroads. They say, you know, you reach the Rubicon and you have to know whether you're going to move in the one direction or not, because we cannot continue the way we are continuing. And so today really is the start of a pivotal moment. It's really that milestone that now leads to the next day, big day, which is election day. But I think more importantly today is the 19 UDP standard, 19 UDP members of the House of Representatives and the 12 PUP members of the House of Representatives are now in the history books. You're now back to 0-0, you know? And yeah, well, you're back to 0-0. That's where you're starting. And for leading into the next 5 years or so. And Normally, nomination day is a day when people show their muscle.
Yes.
Yes.
There's the pageantry. It's a beautiful day. It's so wonderful. It's exciting. There's a pageantry, the passion, the colors, the drama, the emotions, the music, the dancing. I mean, it's really a coordinated, well-designed production that takes place on election day. The flags and so on and so forth. It's where you beginning to take apart and distance yourself more or less from each other.
Yeah.
Dominance or weakness, that comes out on election day. It does not necessarily mean, let it be clear, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win, but it presents an image.
Yeah.
That you want a perception, because if I'm on the fence and I'm weak, I'm not sure how I want to vote, so my position is a bit weakened, and I look at election day, typical human nature, I want to win, I want to be part of the winner's circle, so I'm gauging what's going to happen, and if I see one party look bigger and brighter than the next, and I'm on the fence, I may very well jump that way, if I am not in some position where I am convinced, my convictions are strong.
And if that's your decision-making process.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's a very important day. And also it's a day when you officially place yourself on the ballot.
Yeah.
Because be mindful, many people say that they want to run. The political parties put up their candidates. Those are normally cast in stone unless someone last minute, something may happen or so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting how we address the COVID-19 candidate, I think, coming out of Coruscant Southeast, because that has become an issue.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the political parties will have their third one, and then you have the independents and the third parties, and then this is where people say, well, make us say if you put your money where your mouth is, are you going to run? And so that's what we are going to have today.
Yeah.
And once that process is closed, we are going to know then who are the individuals or the persons who are going to be at that starting date with that zero beside their name in terms of ballots come election day.
I think the positive disruption for both political parties is especially on today, and the fact that there's a pandemic upon us, they are not able to strut that muscle the way that they would want to this time around. So it makes for them to actually reach deeper within the neighborhoods to get to people and tell them what they can bring to the table. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think people should people embrace it? What are your thoughts there?
I believe that people understand and appreciate that we are in a pandemic. I think there's a general understanding, in my view, that people appreciate that we are in a pandemic. There are those persons who also appreciate that it's political season, so there will be politicians that are out there who want to touch them. And when I say touch, not necessarily physically, but touch them with a message, a phone call, and so on and so forth. And because we are all supposed to be complying with certain laws and rules, we're also aware that we must have on our mask, and we must be maintaining social distance and minimize number of people in a crowd and so on. So I think people understand that. I believe what the politicians are going to have to do, though, is to be more creative and innovative in the way they reach out to people. Let us say today is nomination day, so we may not be able to have the motorcades and the drama and the pageantry, but encouraging people to put out your flags, playing the music in their houses, those kinds of, put a little spot on Facebook, on social media, how you are looking at the nomination process, because all the media houses, including yours, will be out there documenting
Of course.
this process.
Yeah.
So it will be how they become creative to engage people, to comment, to sign on, to cheer on their candidate. And to my mind, that is what situations like COVID bring out. It brings out the creativity and innovativeness within us. And I do believe that people, there's a flip side, of course, Marlene and John, where people are saying, this good, so they're not come to my house. I don't have to sit there, I'm tired of sitting there. So you will have those, but to my mind, those hardcore, those persons who are really into politics, who are supporting their candidate, they are going to find creative ways of expressing their support for their candidate on this day.
So, I think that that's a great jumping off point, because we know that this is kind of a part of the tradition, but more so, as you clearly noted before, it's a part of what gets into our psyche and gets the momentum going. There's also a lot of resources that are spent on nomination day to get the masses out there in their T-shirts, and it's very competitive. Today, the standard bearers are going to go into different nomination centers. They're going to be allowed to enter with just the 6 people that are going to nominate them. As we clearly noted before, there won't be any motorcade. Now, how do you think, as you pay attention, how do you think that affects people who rely on this type of momentum to feel engaged in the election process?
It does affect you, particularly if you have been fully engaged in the process. And I say that as to say that if you're the campaigner, the advisor, the persons who are making the music, the flags, the T-shirts, the person who, because remember, it's like also a fashion season, You're taking the T-shirt, you cut it, you create dress. And so those persons who are so intimately involved and engaged, it will have an impact on their psychic, because it's a fever. It's an environment. It's, Marlene and John, it's like Christmas, it's this feeling. You can't touch it per se, but it's a feeling that you're getting to and the hype. And so I believe that it will, and this is why I go back to saying that there is the two sides to it. I think there will be those who, yes, it's there, but maybe it may bring out more in them to say, if I want my candidate to win and I really want my party win, I will step up to the plate and create your own hype, because people do create their own hype. But I do believe that it can impact that psyche, and so it's going to be up to the candidates and their team to find ways in which to create that feeling for them and to keep them engaged. It's really 21 days between now and the election, and so they have that period.
3 weeks from now, we'll be here starting election coverage for the 2020 general elections. And let's talk about what we know about the 2020 election so far. One of the key factors, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your insight on this, is the re-registration process that has taken place and how that impacts the voters list. What we know so far is that there's roughly 180,000, more than 180,000 voters who were registered to participate in this exercise. It's not too far off from the numbers that were registered at the time in 2015. How do you think that will play? What do we need to look at, or what are you looking at, I should say, in the new registered voters?
Well, a number of things, Marlene and John, and I think I want to look first at you spoke about voting trends. Normally, after re-registration exercise, you're going to have a high voter turnout. We saw that in 1998, where the voter turnout was 90%, more or less. And then it gradually shifted down to 80% in 2003, and then 77%, then 73 to 72 point something, 73% in 2015. But interestingly, when you look at the referendum, there were only 65% of the voter turnout, despite the fact that that in itself.
Yeah.
Right. So we start looking then at a couple other things. You have to start looking at, right, drilling down what is happening perhaps per constituency and what's going to happen in terms of even the candidates. If you look at the candidates, you're going to see more than likely, and I say the word more than likely because, as I mentioned earlier, it's only when you're on the ballot and you have been officially nominated, then you go on the ballot. But from my research so far, it appears that we're going to have 93 candidates. Interestingly, 31 from the UDP, of course, 31 from the PUP, and then 31 from the independent and third parties. So we are one third right down the line.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting in the sense that in the last election, the 2015 elections, we had 91, but the 28 that we had were from the BPP and the independents. This time around, we don't have much from the BPP, but what we've had is what I would call the rise of another third party, which is the BPF, the Belize Popular Front. They have 16 in that 25, and we have, of course, 6 independents. Right. So, and I'm saying more than likely, be mindful because they're not officially nominated as yet.
They need their 6 people pay their fee, and then they'll be on the ballot. Yeah.
Then we can officially say it's going to be 93. So if you then look at that, as I've said, another thing we have to look at is where are these independent candidates going and what impact they may have on elections, particularly those elections where the spread or the margin of win was very low. If you look at the candidates right now per constituency, we have one constituency, Belmopan, that has 5 candidates.
Wow.
Which 3 are independent and 2 are from the political parties. And then we have another set of candidates. We have 58% of our constituencies having 3 candidates, and we have 16% having 4 candidates. So the reality, we only have 22% of our constituencies that are only going to have 2 candidates, which are the traditional party. But if you drill a little bit down deeper, then you start looking at where are those candidates going in, what would their impact be on the election, particularly in those constituencies where the spread was very low. If you recall, we had out of the 2015 general elections, we had 43% of our constituencies that won by a spread of more than 10%. Some were extremely high, like, for example, Queen Square with 61%, Mesopotamia with 55%, Lakei with 47%, and so on and so forth. And then we had another 17% of our constituencies, or about 5, where the spread was between 6% and 10%. But interestingly, we have 40% of our constituency where the spread was won by 5% and less. Now, if you drill down a little bit farther, and you get into some of these constituencies that were winning by 1% and 1.1%, for example, Stan Creek West only won by 0.12%.
Wow.
Orange Walk South, 1.1%. Belize Rural Central, 1.1%. Cayo Northeast and Caribbean Shores, 1.26%. And then you look at where some of these independent voters, then you're beginning to see how the election is going to shape up. We can't say much at this point. We'll drill down a little bit more in the constituencies. But I'm saying you're going to start to see how they are going to shape up, because that 40%, which is about 13 constituencies or so, those are going to be battleground constituencies. How you flip them, because the spread will be the extent to what you have to flip them.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about those battleground ones, like the 1% and less than 1% and 1.2% and so on and so forth, then you're going to start having some challenges. And this is where you want to see what would have been the impact of the independent voters and the third parties. So once we have pulled that all together, we can then start truly analyzing what can happen.
Oh, you sparked off so much questions in my head just now with what you said. And so we started with the voter re-registration, and that typically based on the previous trend, after a re-registration exercise, where people say you clean up the rolls,
that's right,
you would have a high voter turnout. But you also note that the re-registration exercise was completed by the time of the referendum, where we only had a 65% turnout. Of course, it wasn't an election, though. It was a very divisive
That's
topic.
very key.
So we're going to be looking at that voter turnout. We can talk about COVID implications a bit later. But moving to what you noted about the election results of 2015. So you said 43% of those who were elected won by a margin of over 10% of votes.
That's right. That's right.
40% was less than 5, and 17 was between 6 and 9. So you're looking at 57% of the people who were elected won by less than 10% of the votes.
That's right. Absolutely.
I'm no great mathematician, I'll tell you that much. But that sounds like close races.
Extremely close, yes.
Exactly. And it becomes even more critical, Marlene and John, because remember, we are not working with the popular vote.
Yeah.
We are working
Break
with
that down for us, because I know in the U.S. people are starting to understand what their electoral colleges mean.
Yes.
And we have the same thing, well, different words, but
Well, yeah, but the difference is this. At the end of the day, we have 31 constituencies. So many people are going to vote in each constituency for one person or the other. So when you total the total amount of persons who have gone to vote, you will end up total amount for the whole country, for the whole 31, voting for either the PUP or the UDP or a third party or a candidate. That becomes the total amount of votes. Now, in that scenario, as what happened in 1993 in Belize, the party that won the majority of the votes cast did not win the election, because we have a system of what you call first past the post. We deal with the number of constituencies and not the number of voters. The number of voters only comes in at the constituency level, not at the national level.
Yeah.
So first past the post means that I can have a constituency, for example, that has 3,000 voters. One person has 1,500, another has 1,000. Clearly the one that has 1,500 wins. I can have another constituency that say have 3,000 voters. One person wins with 1,000, and the person who loses gets 999. At the end of the day, that one vote makes that person win, because it's 1,000 to 999. You see?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, what you may have happen, like what we've seen in many of these constituencies, Cayo South, Lake Independence, Belmopan, Toledo, and so on, where the number of voters are very high.
Yes.
When you start adding up those numbers, you may find that I can win with one in one constituency, while another person may lose with the same amount of votes that somebody win with.
Yeah.
In other words, they can lose with 1,000 because the other person got 1,001, where in another constituency, a person can win with 1,000 because a person got 999.
Yeah.
So we focus then on the 31 constituencies, and it's in each constituency, it's who gets the majority of the votes.
How many times
50% plus one.
How many times in our election history has the popular vote been different from the actual results?
As far as I'm aware, it's only once,
Okay.
and that was in 1993 to 1998,
Okay.
where the then opposition People's United Party won the popular vote, but the United Democratic Party won the number of seats. Once you get in our democracy, at this point, we have 31 seats. Once you get 16, you form the government.
This time around, Carolyn, I think it's going to be very interesting. You did shave out some numbers, or share with us some numbers there after not re-election.
Re-registration,
yeah,
yes.
after a re-registration.
Which was referendum.
Yeah, we're totally cognizant of the youth votes that we've got out here, and there are a lot of people who registered for the first time. But
Absolutely.
One of the things that we're hearing out there, and this is besides the pandemic though, Carolyn, because I've spoken to a lot of people, especially young people, and they're nonchalant about going out to vote because they don't want it, they don't want that. So what are your thoughts there? And how do we try to get these people out to understand the democratic process and how important their votes are?
I believe one of the key factors, and I stand by this, is that the young people of Belize have not necessarily seen a distinction between the political parties. And so what distinguishes one from the other has sort of become blurred. So for me, that's a key issue, and it is one that the political parties will have to deal with. Secondly, what they have seen in their lifetime is not necessarily the kind of dialogue and debates and conversations that take place within our house, that takes place within our media, that really dissects and debates what are the key issues. Earlier, you and Marlene were having a conversation, and the question that you were posing was, okay, if I was the Prime Minister, what would be that one single issue that I want to deal with? We are not having those kinds of conversations. And so to a large extent, they are not in an environment that supports and facilitates that. Another key issue becomes we have had a generation who was, I call it, corralled into a certain thinking based on the availability of technology. You may recall in our earlier years when we had the two major political parties, there was the newspapers and there was Radio Belize. And so everything had to come through them. In fact, we were just discussing a simple issue as hurricane. You knew something was happening with a hurricane because a flag went up on the Supreme Court. Now, how many people live near the Supreme Court anymore? And so we've had multiple platforms now, multiple conversations, and young people also are exposed to so much more now. And so where are the political parties, in my opinion, who are starting to talk about what their party is, what their party stands for? What we tend to have a lot out of the third party is that this, in my opinion, a lot of disgruntlement about what is happening with the traditional parties, as against to start talking about what holds your ideology. It is often said that our democracy is only as strong as the political parties are strong that are rooted in an ideology. If I can't distinguish that, then I would assume everybody is the same. So to my mind, I think that in itself also constrains the young person in terms of their conversations. Because the parties are not creating these kinds of platforms. They're more that one thief and that one corrupt and
as people we are
beyond,
evolving. As people we are evolving, and maybe what worked at one point doesn't mean it'll work in today's reality.
So it's how we find new platforms and new ways. And this is why I'm always excited when I see young people, like in the Youth Voices, the Youth Parliament, and things like that. How we get them, and this starts from the schools, this starts in the families, and the political party has to take it. But now, to my mind, it doesn't mean that they don't have their conversations, because they do have conversations. within amongst themselves. And maybe that is where we need to start finding ways how conversations can merge.
Well, we had a fantastic panel yesterday with first-time voters, and I mean, there's so much information that came out of it. They definitely talked about wanting more substance.
Yes.
They spoke of a detachment from their area representatives. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what they represented. They clearly articulated the issue of the ideology connecting with the why behind the motives of the party. But I want to go back, because again, like I say, I know that you're very data-driven. Very often, the youth voice is dismissed because they don't translate to youth votes. And I want to ask you, because you know the numbers, is it true that as much as we talk and focus on young people and getting involved with voting, that they don't go out and vote?
Traditionally, the vote of that population over 34, particularly that population that hits the 45, they're the population that normally consistently go to vote.
Okay. So your highest is 34 to 40, mid-40.
Once you start moving into that realm, but then be mindful that if you now start to look at population disaggregation, you're now going to start seeing more. We are moving. We have a stronger young people base right now. Yeah. What we are also beginning to move to, let me also say, is an aging population. And so within the next 10, 15 years, you're going to see the pyramid starting to change a bit, where that base in the bottom is not as wide. But in terms of voting traditions, you tend to find that population structure starting just in that 30s, that 34 moving up. That is the population that is consistently out there and voting.
Yeah.
The 18 to 34 range, which is normally considered that youth vote, but that is the vote that, as just like you has to some extent have been disconnected. And I think that has a lot. They have a lot of potential, but what they do bring to the table is a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And I think that is where political parties capitalize on our young people, because they see that they bring that zealousness and youthfulness in terms of the conversation. One of our challenge also, Marlene and John, let me say, that we don't do the necessarily taking data in voting, that you can truly start dissecting and drilling down into data based on sex, based on age groups, based on ethnicity, and so on and so forth. That is something that we seriously need to start to do, because then we can start correlate data and start to see what is more important to certain ethnic groups, to certain age groups, and this sort of thing. This is something that clearly you need to change. One of the things I love watching about US politics is that they even drill it down as far as religion.
Yes.
And so, but we don't do that.
And
I think this is where we need to start, and perhaps this is where young people need to start, pushing and say, hey, we need to start seeing data a little bit more to see how people are voting, because at the end of the day, if the democratic process is not taking into consideration of the youth vote, then we are losing a potential group of people who have so much to give to the growth and development of this country.
I mean, the only pattern I guess you could definitively get out of voting results would be urban versus rural, right? Because you don't have any of the, you don't have which ones are female, which ones are male, what age they are.
Highly educated.
You don't know. In my opinion, that those things can be discerned based on who vote. Because at the end of the day, the elections and boundaries do get the final list of people who voted. Because remember, you have to tick them when you go in.
When you go in.
You vote, they tick off your name.
Yeah.
So you do get the names, and when you input your data into the election process, it states whether you're a male or female. It states your age. Well, not your age, but your birth date. So it states, so you can, the point is you can get the data. It's a matter of what we still live in this society, Marlene and John, where we hold on to data, particularly public office
I was
They
going to
tend to
ask, is that data accessible after the election?
They have a style, my understanding, and I will use this as my understanding, where everything get locks up in a chest with a padlock. I understand. So it does not become, but there are legal issues to be mindful.
Yeah.
That there are periods in which people can appeal the election,
Yeah.
and so this data has to be held under lock and key. And it cannot be opened back unless the Supreme Court orders that it's the court orders that it's open back for recount and that sort of thing. But those are the ballot, the actual data that they collect as to who vote. That should be freely accessible to what you get the numbers. But this again goes back to the political parties, because the political parties have scrutineers in these polling stations. Yeah. And just like the election team, they're ticking off the number of votes, the people who come to vote.
Yeah.
And just like the election team, they reconcile. So if I come out of a constituency that had 1,500 people who vote, at the end of the day, I should have those names. Okay. I should have, because I have a file on them. So you can do your own data. Yeah. In terms of public access, which let me put it this way, there is a difference between the political parties' data and the public access data. That would be for them to do their data analytics. The public access should be able to have it, because it's not everybody who is a part of a political party who uses data. If I'm not a part of a political party, I may have use for data for research as well. Yeah. So I should be able to have it. And that is something we may need to change.
Now, we're quickly running out of time here. Yeah. And I just want to ask you, because I'm sure people are watching and thinking it. Looking at trends is kind of looking at patterns we've seen over the year. In a year like 2020, I mean, isn't it possible that we need to throw out all preconceptions and presumptions and trends, because quite frankly, it's like nothing we've ever seen before?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in the sense that we continue to say it's a year of unpredictability and it's a year of uncertainty. So it's like things are coming at you that you never seen or heard before. Okay. No, in the sense that the data, the data that we are going to have is a number. So you are going to have a number of registered voters. You are going to be able to look at what happened in 2015 vis-a-vis what happened, what can be expected now. Yeah. There are certain constituencies, as we have gone through earlier, as we mentioned, that you can look at those constituencies that have big spreads, those constituencies that have moderate spreads, those constituencies that have smaller spreads, and start looking at what are the potential for those constituencies to flip. Getting ground data from the ground, also understanding who was very active in terms of re-registration, who was very active up to the last days of registration, looking at areas where, for example, COVID-19 is very high, the North, which traditionally have very high voter turnout, then you can start going down into constituency by constituency and see what to expect. We spoke earlier about traditionally, politicians rely a lot on that mature elderly vote, because those people will come out and vote no matter what. Yeah. Now, they are the same voters who may now be at risk, and who their family may be saying, we don't want them to come out. Yeah. And so that becomes what I call the enthusiasm gap.
Yeah. I saw that in your slides. Yeah.
How enthused are we going to be to come out and vote? And that is going to rely on what I call the one-on-one at the constituency level, those political parties who are going to have to be there convincing their voters, we are going to make sure that the place is safe.
That we clean the car after everybody come out. Exactly. Yeah, I think the political machinery will have to sell as much themselves as their sanitary protocols. Carolyn, we are out of time. I hate to cut you off. But the issue here is that we definitely have a lot more to talk about. Of course, this is not the last
Absolutely.
conversation we'll have with you. You've given us a
Absolutely.
tease
Yep.
of some of that data. Thank you again.
Thank you so very much.
You are
indeed.
welcome, John. You're welcome, Marlene. And I will see you when we start drilling down a little bit more once
right.
all the horses are in the stable
Yeah.
there.
We'll
at
know
the
that-
starting point, as they say.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you,
You're
thank you.
welcome. Bye-bye.
All right,
And-
so with that, we're about to take that break, and when we come back, we'll actually have another conversation that surrounds elections. This one is going to be about elections in a pandemic, a Jamaican experience. So we'll have that when we come back.